The building was quiet in the early morning. The hallways were empty, except for the faint echo of footsteps on the polished floors. The janitor moved slowly, pushing a worn cart with cleaning supplies. His uniform was simple, a dull color, and no one ever noticed him much. He was a man who worked without complaints, who arrived before anyone else, and left long after everyone had gone. He knew the rhythm of the building better than anyone, where the lights flickered, which doors stuck, which floors needed extra polish. Yet, despite his diligence, most people treated him as if he were invisible. People often whispered when he passed, sometimes laughing at small, harmless jokes about his job. They meant no harm, really. It was a playful teasing, a way to feel superior for a moment. But the janitor never joined in. He would nod politely, smile faintly, and move on with his work. He had learned long ago that people see what they want to see, and sometimes nothing at all. He had a routine. Each morning, he started with the lobby, wiping the glass doors and sweeping the entrance. He checked the restrooms meticulously, making sure they were spotless before anyone arrived. Then he moved to the offices, quietly dusting desks and arranging chairs. He did it all without drawing attention. He liked it that way. The work was simple, and it kept him busy. Yet there was a rhythm in his movements, a calmness in the way he approached every task, almost like a secret music hidden behind every sweep of his mop. On this particular morning, the building was hosting a small gathering. It was not a formal event, just a few people celebrating a work anniversary with some light music and snacks. A piano had been set up in the corner of the room, polished and gleaming under the soft lights. No one had planned to play it. It was just there as decoration, part of the setting. A few people had gathered near it, chatting, sipping coffee, and laughing. The janitor was making his rounds, making sure everything was clean before the crowd arrived. He noticed the piano, but did not pay it much attention. It was not his place to interfere with their fun. He had seen plenty of events in the building, and he always stayed in the background. That was his role: cleaning, organizing, and observing without becoming part of the scene. A group of workers, noticing the janitor, started nudging each other. One of them whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "I wonder if he even knows how to play." The comment was meant as a joke, and everyone laughed. Some pulled out their phones, already thinking of making a short clip for social media. The mood was light, playful. They saw the janitor as a quiet man, someone who never made waves, someone who could easily be made fun of. The janitor heard the laughter, but he didn't react. He kept moving, adjusting the chairs, wiping the floor, and emptying the trash. He had learned to ignore such things long ago. It didn't hurt him. He had learned that laughter at someone else's expense often says more about the people laughing than the person being laughed at. Then, one of the younger workers stepped forward and called out, half joking, half challenging, "Hey, why don't you sit at the piano and show us what you've got?" The room erupted in laughter. "Yeah, come on," another added. "Let's see if he can actually play something." The janitor paused for a moment, glancing at the piano. It was polished, its black and white keys shining under the lights. His fingers twitched slightly, almost unconsciously, as if remembering a memory long buried. The laughter continued, teasing, joking, expecting a funny scene. The janitor took a slow step forward. People leaned back in their chairs, expecting an awkward moment, expecting the janitor to look nervous, to stumble, to make everyone laugh even more. But the janitor's expression was calm. His steps were measured. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He simply walked toward the piano, as if he had somewhere important to go. As he reached the piano, the room's atmosphere shifted slightly, though no one yet understood why. Some still whispered, "This will be funny," while others watched quietly, sensing something different in the air. He adjusted the bench, sitting down with careful precision. His hands hovered over the keys for a moment, just above the surface, not touching them. He closed his eyes briefly. The room went silent, not completely, but the chatter had dimmed. People instinctively stopped laughing, as if they felt a small change in energy. No one knew what to expect. The janitor had never played in public before, at least no one had seen him do it. Yet, There was a strange confidence in his posture. His back was straight, shoulders relaxed, and his hands rested lightly, almost reverently on the keys. It was the kind of calm that comes from years of private practice, from moments spent in solitude perfecting something that only one person knew about. One of the older employees leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Do you think he really knows how to play?" The colleague shrugged, uncertain. They expected a joke, maybe a few clumsy notes, maybe an awkward pause that would send everyone laughing again. But the janitor didn't seem awkward. He didn't hesitate. He simply waited, as if listening to a silent rhythm that no one else could hear. The room's laughter faded almost completely. Phones were still in hands, ready to capture a moment, but the mood had changed. There was a quiet curiosity now, a sense of anticipation. No one could explain why, but something about the janitor sitting at the piano felt different. It wasn't just the position, the uniform, or the sudden attention. It was the calm, the stillness. The way he seemed completely present in the moment, detached from the teasing, detached from the laughter, detached from judgment. As he finally pressed a key, even the smallest sound made heads turn. It was not loud, not dramatic, not meant to show off. It was a simple note, clean, precise, almost delicate. The room felt a slight shift, like the first hint of wind before a storm. Conversations paused. People leaned forward, unsure why they were suddenly interested. The janitor's hands moved slowly, almost cautiously over the keys, finding notes that fit together naturally, without force. Without effort, the young worker who had dared him to play leaned back, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. He had expected a joke, a stumble, something silly, anything but what was happening. The janitor's hands seemed to know the piano as if it had been a lifelong companion. His fingers moved lightly, yet with control. The room, once filled with laughter and chatter, was now quiet. Only the faint sound of the piano filled the air, gentle and precise. Some people in the room shifted uncomfortably. They had been part of the teasing, part of the joke, and now they were unsure how to react. The janitor didn't glance at them. He didn't respond to the smirks or the whispers. He simply played, letting the music speak for him, letting the notes tell a story he had carried for years in silence. The janitor's music was simple at first. Nothing flashy, nothing meant to impress. But there was a depth, a feeling, a subtle emotion in every note. People began to listen more closely, forgetting the joke, forgetting their phones, forgetting the casual teasing. They were drawn in. It was not just skillet, it was heart. A heart is something you cannot fake. As the first few notes filled the room, few listeners began to feel a strange emotion rising. A lump in the throat, a tightness in the chest, a sudden awareness that they had underestimated this man all along. The janitor's fingers moved gracefully, naturally, as if guided by something far beyond the room, beyond the laughter, beyond the tiny jokes that had been aimed at him. He was alone with the piano, alone with the music, and in that solitude, something extraordinary began to emerge. The crowd's laughter had vanished completely now. Even those who had been the loudest in teasing were silent, unsure of what to do. Their expectations had been completely upended. What they had thought would be a moment of humor had transformed into something else. Entirely something that demanded attention, respect, and perhaps even awe. The janitor continued playing, unaware of the eyes on him, unaware of the whispers, unaware of the disbelief slowly spreading through the room. He was not performing for anyone, nor trying to prove anything. He was simply letting the music flow, letting a part of himself that had been hidden for years speak freely. And in that small room, under the soft glow of lights and the curious gaze of colleagues, a quiet man who had never been noticed, who had always been the subject of gentle jokes, began to reveal something no one expected, a soul, in a depth that could not be contained by a uniform, a role, or the quiet life he had lived so far. For the first time in that space, the janitor was not invisible. He was no longer just a background figure. He was present. He was alive. And the music he played would mark the beginning of a story that no one in the room would forget. The first notes had barely faded when a hush settled over the room. The soft echo of the piano lingered in the corners, bouncing off the walls, filling every empty space. People stared at the janitor in disbelief. The playful teasing and whispered jokes from only moments ago seemed ridiculous now. No one laughed. No one spoke. The only sound was the gentle press of keys beneath his fingers and the faint sighs of astonishment from those who had been watching. Some of the younger employees leaned forward in their chairs, eyes wide. They had been confident, sure that this would be funny. They had imagined clumsy fingers, awkward pauses, maybe a missed note or two. They had expected to film something to share. Later, a short clip of someone failing for a laugh, but nothing they had imagined came close to what they were seeing. The janitor's hands moved with grace, yet the movement seemed effortless, natural, as if his fingers had been born to touch the keys. The music was soft, but it carried weight. Each note had purpose. Each chord built quietly on the one before. There was no showmanship, no attempt to impress, and yet it was captivating. People in the room shifted slightly, unconsciously leaning in. Even those who were still holding their coffee cups lowered them, caught up in the unexpected beauty of the sound. One person whispered to a colleague, I didn't know he could do this." The colleagues shook their head, unable to speak. It was true no one had known. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The janitor's eyes were closed, his face calm, almost serene. He didn't look around at the audience, didn't seek approval, didn't respond to the astonished stares. He simply played, letting the music flow through him. Each note carried emotion, a quiet story of patience, of years of secret practice, of dreams quietly kept alive even in the midst of a life that had been ordinary and overlooked. The room's energy shifted. What had been laughter and light teasing became awe and curiosity. People stopped glancing at their phones. The videos they had intended to make suddenly felt trivial, almost intrusive. They realized they were witnessing something rare, something authentic. No one had expected this. No one had prepared for this. And yet, it felt perfectly natural. A few of the older employees exchanged glances. They had known the janitor for years. They had seen him work quietly, always polite, always diligent. Some had even considered him shy, maybe a little awkward, but harmless and simple. And yet here he was, filling the room with music that spoke of knowledge, experience, and a depth of feeling none of them had suspected. One of them murmured under their breath, "How? How has he been hiding this?" The janitor's music began to flow more confidently. The first few notes had been gentle, a test, a soft introduction. But now it became clear that he had a repertoire, and that he had practiced perhaps 4 hours, years in silence. He played scales and arpeggios with a smoothness that made the piano sing. His fingers danced lightly across the keys, not for anyone's approval, not for anyone's applause, but because the music demanded it. And somehow, the room seemed to respond. Even the lights felt softer, the walls more attentive, as if the building itself was holding its breath to listen. People began to notice small details. The way his left hand moved with steady rhythm, like the foundation of a story, while his right hand painted melodies above it. The way his posture never faltered, the way his expression remained calm, but deeply focused. Even those who had been most confident in their jokes, most certain that this would be a comedic moment, now sat quietly, unsure of what to do. Caught between admiration and disbelief, the janitor continued playing, the music growing slightly more complex. The notes rose and fell with emotion, but never forcefully, never harshly. There was a softness, a warmth, that seemed to touch something deep within the listeners. One young woman shifted in her chair, her eyes misty. She had only intended to attend the gathering for a short while, to chat and have a snack, but now she found herself caught in a moment she would remember for a lifetime. She glanced at her colleagues, who were equally quiet, and realized they were all sharing the same experience. Shared understanding that something extraordinary was happening right before their eyes. A few of the more outspoken people, the ones who had been joking the loudest, tried to mask their surprise. One leaned toward another and whispered, I didn't think he's amazing." The other nodded, unable to respond. Words felt insufficient, inadequate in the face of what they were witnessing. The music carried something beyond technique, beyond skill. It carried a story, a soul, a truth that could not be denied. The janitor played a short passage and paused briefly, fingers hovering above the keys. His eyes remained closed. The silence that followed was not empty. It was expectant. People waited, almost holding their breath, wondering what would come next. And then he continued, seamlessly transitioning into a melody that seemed to rise from the floor itself. It was gentle, yet powerful, simple, yet profound. Each note felt intentional, like a word in a sentence in a story. Some of the listeners felt a chill run down their spines. Others felt tears prickling in their eyes, surprising themselves with how deeply they were affected. No one had expected this. No one had imagined that a janitor, someone they had overlooked for years, someone they had quietly joked about, could reveal such a hidden talent. And yet, here he was, showing that life's surprises often come in the quietest forms. In the most unexpected places. As the music continued, the audience began to notice small imperfections that made the performance feel real, human, and not rehearsed for an audience. A key might be slightly soft, a chord slightly uneven, but it did not matter. These tiny imperfections added to the beauty, the authenticity. It was music played for love, for passion, for the joy of creating something that had lived in him for years, waiting for a moment to be heard. One of the attendees, a man who had always considered himself a music lover, leaned back in his chair, almost in disbelief. He had attended concerts, recitals, and performances before, but nothing had ever struck him like this. He realized that music was not just about technique or fame. It was about feeling, about connection, about truth. And the janitor, quietly and without effort, had reminded everyone in that room of that truth. A small child who had wandered into the room during the performance now sat cross-legged on the floor, wide-eyed, listening intently. The janitor's music had captivated even the youngest audience member, proving that real talent does not discriminate by age or expectation. The child's mother smiled softly, feeling a mixture of pride and astonishment, whispering to herself that some gifts are too big to hide. No matter how ordinary life may seem, the janitor's hands moved effortlessly. Yet there was a clear awareness behind each motion. He had mastered not just the notes, but the feeling, the emotion behind them. It was as if every moment of his life, every struggle, every quiet night, every moment spent unseen, had prepared him for this very moment. And now, all of it was flowing out through his fingers. Touching everyone who listened, some people began to realize that they had underestimated him for years. They remembered how they had laughed quietly, how they had whispered jokes, how they had dismissed him as someone simple or unremarkable. And now they were faced with the undeniable truth. They had been wrong. The janitor, with his calm demeanor and quiet presence, had hidden a brilliance that could not be ignored. As the music shifted into a slower, more reflective passage, the room seemed to lean in closer. Even those who had been skeptical, even those who had been planning to laugh, were now fully engaged, fully present. They felt the depth of the moment, the humanity of the performance. The janitor's fingers moved lightly across the keys, painting a story that spoke of resilience, patience, and quiet determination. The longer he played, the more people began to notice the details that made the performance extraordinary. The subtle pauses, the gentle crescendos, the way he lingered on certain notes, allowing them to resonate and echo. It was not just music. It was a conversation, a sharing of something deeply personal, yet universally felt. People felt privileged to witness it. Even if they had arrived expecting nothing more than a small gathering and a few jokes, the janitor's calm expression never wavered. He did not seek recognition. He did not glance at the audience for approval. He simply played, fully immersed in the music. And because he was fully immersed, the audience was pulled in as well. It was impossible not to be. Each note seemed to reach into the room, touching hearts, stirring emotions, breaking down the walls of expectation and judgment that had been built over years of casual assumptions. By now, The atmosphere in the room had changed completely. The playful energy, the teasing, the casual chatter, all of it had disappeared. In its place was a shared reverence, a collective realization that they were witnessing something rare, something genuine, something that defied expectations. The janitor, who had once been invisible, had become the center of attention, not because he sought it, but because he deserved it. Even as the final notes of the passage faded, the silence lingered. No one spoke immediately. No one moved. They simply sat, absorbing what had just happened, letting the experience settle into their minds and hearts. The janitor lifted his hands from the keys, slowly, gently, as if afraid to break the spell. He opened his eyes, looked briefly around the room, and gave a small, polite nod. It was a gesture of humility, of quiet acknowledgement, but also a sign that he had shared something deeply personal and meaningful. And in that moment, everyone understood that this was more than a performance. It was a revelation. It was proof that even the quietest, most overlooked people can carry immense talent, profound emotion, and the power to change the way others see the world. The janitor had taken a joke, a casual challenge, and turned it into something unforgettable. The janitor's music had completely captured the room. What had begun as a casual, playful challenge had transformed into something much larger, something deeper than anyone could have imagined. The soft hum of the piano, the gentle movement of his fingers, and the quiet intensity in his face held everyone's attention. People who had been chatting, laughing, or even checking their phones moments before now sat frozen, eyes wide, listening as if they were hearing the world for the first time. Some felt the music stir emotions they didn't even realize they were holding inside. A woman near the back brushed at the corners of her eyes, startled by the unexpected intensity of the notes. She hadn't meant to be emotional, had come simply for a coffee and a chat. But the music reached her in a way she couldn't explain. It was not dramatic, not loud, but intimate, as if the janitor was telling a story that only she and the others in the room were allowed to hear. The janitor's hands moved fluidly, almost effortlessly. He was not just playing notes. He was telling a story through sound. It was as if every chord carried memory, every melody held a secret, every pause reflected a moment of reflection. People began to notice details in the music they had never thought to pay attention to before the gentle rise and fall. The pauses that allowed a note to linger, the way each phrase seemed to lead naturally into the next. A man who had been the most vocal and joking earlier sat with his mouth slightly open, unable to believe what he was hearing. He had underestimated the janitor completely. The teasing, the playful comments, the whispered jokes, everything now felt shallow, even a little cruel. He realized he had judged a person by appearances, by a uniform, by a simple routine, and now he understood how wrong he had been. The music began to take on a richer tone. The janitor played slowly, thoughtfully, but with growing confidence. There was emotion behind each note, a depth that suggested years of dedication, of practice, of silent persistence. The crowd leaned in, instinctively aware that what they were hearing was not just talent, but something more: passion. History, a piece of the janitor's life that had been hidden away, waiting for the right moment to emerge. People exchanged glances, silent acknowledgments that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The young employees who had laughed first now felt a mix of guilt and awe. They had intended the moment as a joke, as a fleeting entertainment, and instead, they were confronted with something genuine, something rare, something that demanded attention and respect. The lesson was clear: never underestimate anyone. The janitor continued to play, his eyes occasionally opening to glance at the keys, never at the audience. There was no need for recognition. The music itself was enough, powerful in its simplicity, commanding without arrogance, speaking to anyone willing to listen. Some began to feel chills, a sense of awe that came from being unexpectedly touched by a profound expression. It was a reminder that the most ordinary appearances can hide extraordinary depth. A few of the older employees whispered quietly among themselves, trying not to interrupt the flow of the music. One said, I've worked with him for years and never imagined this." Another nodded, voice low, "All this time. And he never said a word. How could we have missed it?" They felt a mixture of admiration and regret. They had known the janitor as quiet, polite, unassuming. They had thought they knew him. And yet this performance shattered every assumption. The janitor's hands moved faster now. Still controlled, still deliberate. The melody became more complex, layering emotion upon emotion. It was not flashy, not for show, but skillful in a way that made people lean closer. A woman in the corner covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hide her surprise. She had no idea he was capable of such music. Each chord seemed to tell a story of patience, of quiet struggle, of inner strength. She felt a sudden connection to the janitor, a recognition of the human experience that his music conveyed without words. A small child, sitting cross-legged near the front, looked up with wide eyes. The child had been restless earlier, fidgeting, barely paying attention, but now was entranced. The music seemed to speak directly to the child's imagination, painting pictures with each note. The janitor's performance, though unassuming in appearance, reached across age, experience, and expectation. It was universally human, universally moving. The janitor slowed the tempo slightly, allowing a few notes to linger longer than usual. It was deliberate, purposeful. People noticed, almost instinctively, that these pauses were not mistakes. They were moments to reflect, to breathe, to feel the weight of what had been played. A man sitting near the center of the room exhaled slowly, realizing he had been unconsciously holding his breath, completely absorbed in the sound. The music had the power to quiet the mind, to stop time, even briefly. Some of the listeners began to imagine what the janitor's life must have been like. They wondered how someone so ordinary in appearance could hold such a gift. How many years had he practiced in secret? How many nights had he spent alone, fingers on the keys, perfecting melodies no one would ever hear? The story the music told was unspoken, but palpable, a story of persistence, patience, and passion hidden behind everyday life. The janitor's eyes, when they opened briefly, reflected a calmness, a peace. He played not for recognition, not for applause, not even for the audience that had gathered. He played because it was part of him, a truth he could not deny. And the audience sensed it. They understood that this moment was authentic, uncontrived, and profoundly human. No one had asked him to play. No one had expected this. And yet this moment, spontaneous and honest, was perfect. The music began to build again, not aggressively, but with increasing confidence and grace. The janitor's fingers moved with precision, yet each note carried a feeling that could not be learned from books or lessons alone. It was experience. It was heart. It was life itself. People felt as though the room had been transformed. The small gathering space now seemed larger, more open, filled with possibility. The walls themselves seemed to lean in, listening to the story that unfolded in sound. One employee, who had been skeptical from the beginning, whispered to a colleague, "It's like he's telling us his life without words." The colleague nodded, unable to respond otherwise. There was an honesty in the performance, a sincerity that touched every listener. The room was silent except for the piano, and every note seemed to carry meaning beyond music alone. The janitor's performance shifted again, now slower, more reflective. The melody became tender, almost vulnerable. People could feel the emotion in every phrase. Some wiped tears quietly from their eyes. Others leaned back, letting the music wash over them, feeling the story without needing to know the details. The janitor had the power to evoke empathy, to connect with every person present, regardless of age, experience, or expectation. The audience began to realize that they had judged him too quickly. They had assumed that his uniform, his role, his quiet demeanor defined him. And yet all those assumptions were shattered. The janitor, who had seemed invisible, had revealed a hidden depth, a talent, a human truth that could not be ignored. People felt both admiration and humility. They had underestimated him, and now they were confronted with the reality that greatness often hides where least expected. The janitor continued to play, the music rising and falling naturally, ebbing and flowing like a gentle river. The notes were precise, yet flexible. The melody carried a story that was private, yet universal. Listeners felt as though the janitor had invited them into a secret, something sacred, something deeply personal. And they accepted the invitation, captivated by the unexpected beauty of the moment. As the performance progressed, the room seemed to breathe with the music. People leaned forward, unconsciously matching the rhythm, feeling each note resonate in their chest. Even those who had been the loudest in jokes moments ago now sat quietly, transfixed. The janitor's talent had commanded their full attention, leaving no space for distraction, no room for doubt. The janitor's hands glided over the keys with growing assurance. Each movement was deliberate, every chord carefully chosen. The music flowed naturally, effortlessly, but it was clear to anyone listening that it was the result of years of private dedication. Years of practicing in silence, years of nurturing a gift that had long gone unnoticed. And yet, all that time had been worth it. Because now, at this very moment, the audience was witnessing something rare, something extraordinary. A hush settled over the room again as the janitor shifted into a final passage for this segment. The notes were soft, reflective, almost hesitant, but they carried power nonetheless. People felt the depth of the music, the story behind it. The performance was no longer about impressing anyone. It was about truth, about expression, about sharing a piece of himself that had always been hidden. As the last note lingered, fading slowly into silence, the audience exhaled collectively. It was not applause yet. No one moved immediately. They were still absorbing the experience, still feeling the weight of what they had heard. The janitor lifted his hands from the keys slowly, carefully, like a painter stepping back from a completed masterpiece. He opened his eyes fully, glanced at the audience for a brief moment, and smiled faintly, modestly. There was no arrogance, no pride, just quiet satisfaction. People in the room were stunned. The young employees who had laughed first now felt a mixture of awe and regret. They had intended a joke, a fleeting amusement, and instead had witnessed something transformative. The older employees, who had long known the janitor, now saw him in a completely new light. The quiet man they had overlooked for years had shared a part of himself that was undeniable, unforgettable, and profoundly human. And as the room slowly began to regain composure, people began to whisper again, but this time, the words were not jokes. They were questions, observations, acknowledgments of talent and depth. I had no idea. He's incredible. Why didn't he ever show us before? The janitor, meanwhile, quietly settled back, turning to his work in small movements, though the audience could no longer see him as simply a janitor. He had become a musician, a storyteller, a living reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that every person carries stories, passions, and gifts waiting for the right moment to emerge. The room remained quiet for a few moments, after the last note faded. People were still absorbing what had just happened. The soft hum of the piano lingered in their minds like an echo that refused to disappear. They were no longer thinking about jokes or challenges. All that mattered now was the music and the person behind it. And slowly, curiosity began to grow. Someone from the back of the room, barely able to contain themselves, finally asked, "Where? Where did you learn to play like that?" The question was soft, almost hesitant, because it felt inappropriate to demand an answer after something so personal had been shared through music alone. The janitor paused for a moment, letting the words settle. Then he leaned back slightly, fingers still lightly touching the keys as if reluctant to let go, and gave a small, quiet smile. He began to speak, his voice calm and gentle, not loud, not commanding. It was the voice of someone used to being overlooked, someone accustomed to speaking only when necessary. "I learned a long time ago," he said softly. "I loved music as a child. It was the only thing that felt like mine, the only thing I could hold on to when everything else was uncertain." A few heads turned and eyes softened. People had known him as a janitor, a quiet man who had always been polite but invisible. Now, hearing him speak, They realized how little they knew about him. He continued, almost as if telling a story to himself rather than anyone else. Life. Life didn't make it easy to continue. There were times I had to give up on many things. But I never gave up on music. It was the one part of me that no one could take away. People listened closely, captivated not only by his words but by the tone, the quiet dignity behind them. There was no bitterness, no resentment, just truth. He spoke of long nights in small empty rooms, of practicing quietly, alone, when no one was watching. He told of childhood memories of sitting at an old piano, pressing keys until his fingers ached, and feeling joy that had nothing to do with recognition or applause. Music had been his companion, his comfort, his escape. A woman sitting near the front whispered to herself, almost inaudibly, "All this time, and we never knew." She felt a lump in her throat. She had assumed the janitor was just ordinary. She had assumed he had a simple life, limited talents, limited experiences, and now she realized how wrong she had been. He spoke about challenges, too, about moments when life had demanded practicality over passion. Jobs, responsibilities, people who didn't understand. Yet he never let go entirely. He practiced in secret. He played in quiet moments, during breaks, after hours, when the world was asleep. Music had been his secret, his private world, a place where he could be completely himself. As he spoke, the audience began to sense a depth to the music they had just heard. They could imagine the years of dedication behind each note, the private struggles, the sacrifices made to keep the music alive. This wasn't just talent. It was perseverance, courage, and love. Each chord had been forged in silent determination, each melody shaped by countless unseen hours. A man in the back of the room spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" The janitor looked thoughtful, then shrugged gently. "I didn't need to. Music doesn't need an audience. I played because it was mine. And sometimes it feels more honest to keep something like that to yourself until the right moment comes along." The room fell silent again, but this time it was a silence of understanding. The audience now saw him not only as a talented musician, but as a person who had lived a full, quiet life, a person whose experiences, struggles, and joys had been hidden behind a simple uniform. They realized that everyone carries stories, talents, and passions that are invisible to the casual observer. Some of the younger employees, who had laughed first, now felt ashamed of their initial assumptions. They had treated him as a joke, someone to be entertained by. And now, seeing him speak, seeing him reveal a part of himself so honestly, they felt a mixture of respect and guilt. One of them leaned to a colleague and whispered, "We judged him all this time, and it was wrong." The colleague nodded, voice quiet, completely wrong. The janitor smiled faintly and returned his hands to the piano. This time, the notes he played were different. They were softer, more reflective, as if sharing pieces of his past. Each phrase seemed to carry a memory, a quiet childhood evening, a small triumph, a private sorrow. The audience listened closely, feeling the weight and the beauty of each note. It was as if he was allowing them to glimpse his life, piece by piece, without saying it outright. A few people felt tears prickling their eyes. It was impossible not to feel moved. The music carried emotion in its purest form. No explanation, just feeling. The janitor's life had been ordinary on the surface, but beneath that surface lay a depth that now touched everyone present. They understood that talent alone did not make him remarkable. It was the combination of talent, persistence, humility, and resilience that made him extraordinary. A child, who had been sitting quietly now, rested their head on their mother's shoulder. The mother whispered softly, "See? Everyone has something special inside." The janitor, without even looking at them, seemed to confirm it through his music. He played not to show off, not to seek praise, but to share a truth. A human connection that transcended status, age, and expectation. The music shifted again, growing more confident, more assertive, yet never losing its warmth. It told stories of growth, of endurance, of finding joy despite life's difficulties. The audience could almost see the janitor's journey unfold before them, the long hours, the quiet nights, the persistence that kept him connected to his passion, even when life demanded otherwise. Each note seemed to whisper, "I existed, I persevered, I never gave up." People began to reflect on their own lives. They thought about the small moments they had ignored, talents they had overlooked, the potential they had failed to see in themselves or in others. The janitor's story was no longer just about him. It had become a mirror for everyone present, a reminder that everyone has hidden depths, quiet struggles, and untold potential. The older employees felt a mixture of admiration and regret. They had known him for years, yet never taken the time to truly see him. They realized now that people cannot be understood at a glance, that quiet lives can carry profound stories, and that judging someone by appearance or role is always short-sighted. They felt humbled by the experience, grateful that they had witnessed it. The janitor played for a long time, the music rising and falling, soft, then strong, joyful, then reflective. Each section seemed to reveal another layer of his life, and the audience absorbed every note. It was as if they were walking through his memories, feeling what he had felt, seeing what he had seen, understanding the choices he had made. And yet he did not speak much. He let the music do the talking, trusting that it would convey what words could not. By the end of this extended passage, the audience was fully captivated. They were no longer thinking of him as a janitor, as someone simple, as a subject of jokes. He had become something else entirely, a storyteller, an artist, a human being who had taken ordinary life and turned it into something extraordinary through patience, resilience, and dedication. As he finally rested his hands on the keys, the room remained silent for a moment. The air was heavy with emotion. People looked at him with new eyes, with respect and wonder. The janitor smiled faintly again, quietly, modestly. It was a small smile, but it carried meaning. It said without words that he had shared something important, something honest, something that connected him to everyone in the room in a way that nothing else could. A woman whispered, almost to herself, "I didn't know." "I had no idea." Another nodded, voice low, "Neither did I. None of us did." The janitor, still seated at the piano, allowed the silence to linger. It was a silence of reflection, of realization, of understanding. The audience felt privileged to witness it, aware that they were seeing a rare truth unfold, life's passion revealed in the most human way possible. He finally rose from the piano bench slowly, almost reluctantly, as if leaving behind a part of himself that he had been sharing so freely. People watched him, moved in ways they could not fully express. They had come expecting a joke, a playful moment, perhaps a brief distraction. Instead, they had witnessed a revelation, a human stow.